Futurama is back for its second revival season on Hulu. After dropping 10 episodes last summer, we're getting another 10 this summer, and if you didn't hear, an additional 20 episodes in the 2 years following this year. Futurama is fully back, baby. And while the first return season had some highs and lows, it did have a couple truly excellent episodes and ended on a massive high note. And despite another foray into a topical subject that already feels dated, this season premiere delivered a pretty classic existential Bender story, one that I really enjoyed. So let's dive into Futurama's take on Bender's cultural heritage and also NFTs. Hey, just a heads up, last year I got a lot of complaints about spoilers when I released my Futurama breakdowns on Mondays, so starting next week, I'll be putting the breakdowns up on Tuesdays, but they'll be on my Patreon on Mondays for those who really want to see them immediately. So if you just can't wait, go to patreon.com/Johnny2Cellos. All the breakdowns will be up on Monday, and I also post other videos early and have exclusive commentaries over there as well. If you can wait, enjoy them every Tuesday. Thanks.
Subscribe.
Alright, so right off the bat, I was pretty concerned for this episode. The opening scene lambasting NFTs was sort of a symptom of the exact thing I didn't love last season. Overly topical story ideas that already feel dated. NFTs rose and fell so embarrassingly quickly that it feels like they've been out of the cultural consciousness for like 2 years already, which makes sense since that's about when they wrote these episodes. That being said, though the opening scene wasn't my favorite, the rest of the episode handled itself really well. Even the NFT-centric subplot was mostly fun, since the core of that story was the crew's NFT heist, and not really the NFTs themselves. And there were things I appreciated about the NFT explanation scene itself, even if I found the coverage of NFTs in general to be super dated and a little cringy. For one, I love that all of the kids are just sort of a kid gang now. Hubert, Dwight, and Kif and Amy's kids were all slowly added to the cast over the course of the entire series, and I like that they all just hang out now. They're a gang. Honestly, it's feeling like we're getting more of Axel, Mandy, and Newt than of Kif these days. I also enjoyed conceptually that the kids were the ones explaining NFTs to the adults, even if the incorporation of the NFTs at all was, as I mentioned before, a little cringy.
NFT stands for non-fungible token. That means it's unique.
So, while I wasn't a huge fan of this first sequence, I actually think the place they go with it is really great. While there's the obvious Bored Ape parallel with the apathetic fish company or whatever, the idea of turning Bender into a bunch of copy and paste NFTs with all of his personas from over the course of the series is very funny. I'm just grateful this isn't something they actually wanted to do and it's just a bit in the show. And Bender wanting to be featured as an NFT is so very Bender. He is so desperate to be adored and remembered. It's one of his most vital character traits. Being immortalized as a series of NFTs is absolutely something he'd want for himself. The very end of the episode showcases all of the Bender NFTs, and it is just jam-packed with references to countless old episodes, which I will run down probably at the end of this video because there are so many it would totally disrupt the flow of the breakdown. But I really like this setup. It allows for some fun references to old episodes, and it ties into vintage Bender behavior. Honestly, a very natural way to implement the whole NFT idea. And the whole realization that NFTs are effectively nothing, sending Bender spiraling, is a very funny way to trigger that classic Bender existential crisis.
I don't know who or what I am anymore.
God, Bender crying is just always funny. Bender's existential crises are a fundamentally important recurring theme in Futurama. We didn't see much of it in the last season on Hulu, and honestly, the last episode to really go for one of these stories was a bit underwhelming in Free Will Hunting, but Bender's adventure back to his native Mexico to meet his family really worked for me in this one. Even though when he got there, he ignored a turtle trapped on its back, the Bender from Crimes of the Heart would never. But Bender reconnecting with his Mexican roots is really fun. I always appreciated that what was clearly a throwaway joke in season 3 became such a core part of his character.
I'm Mexican, and I find that offensive.
And then this joke expanded just 3 episodes later with the reveal that his last name is Rodriguez. I just think that's so funny. A quick Hecho in Mexico joke became vital to the character's history and backstory. Speaking of, Bender meeting his family back in Mexico is probably my favorite aspect of this episode, even going so far as to ensuring that the lineage still lines up with previous lore, since we know that Bender's mother is an armbot, and we see that his grandmother, Abuelatron, is as well. Danny Trejo plays Bender's cousin, Doblando Rodriguez. Doblar is the Spanish verb that means to fold, and it's used synonymously with bend.
Yep, it's shiny and metal, all right. And one of your ass. También es magnífico.
I love that the color of Doblando's metal is a bit warmer, like it's been sun-worn from living in the Mexican sun. That's just a really cool little detail. And we get to see a ton of Bender's extended family as well, including his adorable little niece. This whole thing had me thinking about Bender's family tree, so I'm actually going to be dropping an entire video breaking that down this week, so keep an eye out. But everything in Bender's ancestral home is very funny to me. Even just on its face, the idea of robots living in this incredibly old-timey setting just makes for some great visuals. Lightning-quick knitting, creating Ethernet cable from electric sheep with a spinning wheel, ancient pottery, just the novelty of advanced machine intelligence beating a rug with a rug beater does not wear on me. I think my favorite scene in the episodes, though, were Bender connecting with his abuelatron.
You know, Bendejo, I used to love cooking with your mother.
Could you tell me about her?
These scenes are sweeter than they have any right to be, especially since they're mostly talking about a robotic arm here. This episode was written by Eric Horsted, who is a bit of an expert when it comes to fleshing out Bender's history. He wrote The Lesser of Two Evils, which introduced fellow bending unit Flexo, Benless Love, which showcased Bender getting built for the first time by his robotic arm mother, and then also Lethal Inspection, which slightly retconned Bender's assembly, showcasing that he was initially built as a baby bending unit instead, which, in my opinion, is much better. That's an example of a quality retcon. He also did The Bots and the Bees, which introduced Bender's son, Ben. I guess the one aspect of Bender's ancestral home that I wasn't wowed by was the whole hoop aspect, the ancient sport played by the entire village. But that's seemingly because hoop isn't something they made up for the episode. It's an actual sport played by the ancient Mayans that did involve ritual sacrifice, so that might be why it stood out to me. Some of the sequences during the hoop tournament were really fun. This is probably the best a 3D model of Bender has ever looked. I mean, look at this thing, what a great shot. Though I'm not sure how much I love the idea that Bender's family tricked him into winning to be sacrificed by the ancient robot gods. He gets this really great celebratory moment with his family after he wins, and then it's revealed that they basically set him up to be sacrificed. Kind of a bummer. This gag where Bender puts these skeleton arms on one at a time while armless is a pretty fun callback to the pilot episode when he did that same thing with his regular arms, and I did enjoy Bender meeting the ancient robot gods. Really cool designs, and the idea that their programming is facilitated through these ancient bead necklaces that have been showcased through the episode is pretty cool.
That one does spreadsheets. That one solves the traveling salesman problem. And that one lets you play solitaire on your phone.
This is also one of those solid, dorky science jokes Futurama is known for. The traveling salesman problem is basically a computer science exercise in optimization, determining the shortest possible route a traveling salesman can take while hitting every single city he needs to and returning to the point of origin. I am, of course, not a computer scientist, and I'm sure many of you could explain this concept more thoroughly in the comments, but as a scientific layman and fan of Futurama, I love when the show brings these concepts up. It's a fun way to learn, for me at least. I also laughed incredibly hard at this Bender delivery when the ancient bots explain how to steal an NFT off the blockchain.
You'd have to be able to factor huge integers in polynomial time.
I know, a little kid told me.
Now, the subplot of this episode was the continued NFT storyline, and even though NFTs are so dated already, this story was in the form of a heist, and I had a ton of fun with it. It's hard to be mad that they're heisting NFTs when the heist itself is so much fun.
You're on, Zoidberg. Uh-oh, I can't snip it.
Overall, my only real misgiving about this episode is how hilariously dated NFTs already are as a plot point, and some of the scenes where they're sort of exhaustingly going over the details of how NFTs do or don't work is a bit much. But I found the way it was haphazardly tied into Bender's familial lesson to be pretty funny. Bender expresses how meeting his family reminds him of all of the great facets of himself.
Sounds like your family's a lot like your NFT.
Yeah, that's why I want it back, to remind me of my people or whatever.
It's pretty classic Bender to go on a whole self-reflective journey to meet his ancestors and end with the takeaway that Bender is great. But honestly, I was most impressed that they managed to make something so profoundly stupid as NFTs actually hold emotional weight for Bender as a character.
I now own the factors of a million-digit binary number that no one else can ever have.
One of the funniest aspects of Bender as a character is that he is so desperate to be unique, remembered, special, despite the fact that he is a mass-produced bending unit. So the idea that he has this wholly unique piece of data that, while completely meaningless, is 100% his own, actually does make a ton of sense for the character. It's pretty damn creative. Far more creative than any single NFT, that's for sure. Plus, they get this one last excellent jab in.
Why would a human want an NFT if it's just some huge string of numbers?
No conceivable reason.
So even though it feels a couple years late, it's hard for me to hate this dunk. It's a very funny line. Honestly, when the episode started, I was pretty instantly worried about this new season. Dropping a big NFT sequence immediately was definitely a concerning way to start the year, but overall the episode really worked for me. I think they used the NFTs as a plot device a bit better than they did with the Bitcoin episode last season. I felt the concept was used in a pretty natural way to explore Bender as a character, and the heist was a pretty good time. While there is a ton of NFT-based gobbledygook, I think the integration of the idea into the episode outside of that was pretty natural and effective. It is interesting. I think that the episode does a really good job just fully dunking on the concept of NFTs, but I also think people are just sort of so exhausted by the brief amount of time that NFTs were a thing that even the mere mention of them feels in itself exhausting. Even though there are some certifiably funny dunks in the episode, I think people will just feel negatively about any references to NFTs at all. The stuff surrounding the NFTs was definitely what worked best for me. Probably the best Bender existential crisis we've gotten since like the early 2010s. I also want to say off the bat, just like last year, I actually got to watch the first 6 episodes of the season early, so I'm really happy to tell you that the whole NFT thing is by far the most topical the episodes have gotten this far. There are a couple subplots here and there that make dated references, but for the most part, anything that is remotely referential still feels very Futurama on the whole. They're doing a much better job this season, making it feel like they took topical ideas as a starting point and then built a more Futurama type plot out of it, rather than slapping a Futurama skin on a modern subject like the Hulu or COVID episodes last year. I'm really excited for you all to see next week's episode, and I'm very excited to talk about it. It's probably my favorite in the run so far. It's a follow-up to the classic Fry flashback episodes that are mostly so highly regarded. Okay, and now, before we go, let's run down every single reference from across Futurama in Bender's NFTs in order. We've got Firefighter Bender from the Inhuman Torch, Super King from Less Than Hero, Wireframe Bender as seen in Lethal Inspection, Gold Bender from the Farnsworth Parabox, Bender the Magnificent from Jurassic Park, Night Bender from Bender's Game, Fedora Bender from Stench and Stenchability, Pharaoh Bender from A Pharaoh to Remember, Gender Bender from Raging Bender, Bender in his Blips or Cruds uniform from Assy Come Home, Bender disguised as a woman trying to get into the Olympics in Bend Her, Sombrero Bender as seen in this episode and also Lethal Inspection, Hillbilly Bender from Where the Buggalo Roam, Regular Old Bender, Napoleon Bender, which is slightly color palette swapped from Decision 3012, Satanic Ritual Bender from Calculon 2.0, Camping Bender from Spanish Fry, Hard Hat Bender seen in Into the Wild Green Yonder, though the hat was white in that, and it's yellow here, Fur Coat Bender from Raging Bender, Pirate Bender from the Deep South, Cowboy Bender from the Parallel Universe in I Dated a Robot. Bender also actually stole this same hat in Leela and the Jeanstalk. Monk Bender from Free Will Hunting, Soldier Bender from the reenactment in Lethal Inspection, Nonchalanto from The Prisoner of Benda, Mob Bender from Silence of the Clamps, and British Bender from All the President's Heads. If y'all recognize any of the ones I skipped from old episodes, let me know. There was a few that I just couldn't figure out. And remember to tune in next Monday on my Patreon or next Tuesday here on the channel for the next breakdown, and Bender's Family Tree later this week. All right, thanks folks. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.